everyone, welcome back to the 5th episode of The History of K-Pop Season 1, where we have been taking a trip back in time to take a look at the fundamentals of what we know and love called K-Pop. I hope you guys have all caught up on the previous episodes of this nowhere to be found K-pop content, because what we'll be exploring in today's video will also be one of a kind. Continuing from the last episode, we'll be concluding our deep dive into the prolific career of Seo Taiji and Boys, arguably the most significant group in the emergence of K-pop as we know it today. Oh, and if you haven't already, please be sure to check out the last episode linked in the above right corner, where we discussed the group's last 2 albums and their overall album sales. Now, for those of you who are all caught up today, I'll be covering the legacy left by Seo Taiji and Boys, their loyal fandom, how they ultimately and sadly disbanded, and how foreign media perceived the group's legacy. That sure is a lot of topics, right?
So many.
Really? So many?
I need my toe to count on them.
As we saw during our previous episodes about Seo Taiji and Boys, their first 2 albums contributed to shifting the paradigm of the Korean music industry, with the latter 2 pretty much solidifying those changes. And as I just said, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today, and it will be another exciting ride. So, without further ado, let's get right into it.
Let's go!
So, what kind of legacy did Seo Taiji and Boys leave in the Korean music scene and the broader society? Well, let's find out. The craze that this group brought to the Korean music industry is considered revolutionary and unprecedented. And we all know that this is something that we don't hear quite often in the K-pop industry. As I touched on during both episodes about the group, Seo Taiji and Boys created many trends and broke numerous records. It's basically their hobby at this point. Just to remind you all of what we previously covered, they began to bring over foreign musical influences from the United States and the United Kingdom into the Korean music scene, which was basically Western music. In addition, they popularized the dance and rap genre, which they introduced and combined in many ways through their activities. Their first album showed off the combination of dance and rap genre for the first time in the industry. Their second album attempted to combine Korean traditional music with hip-hop and heavy metal. Their third album attempted to mix rap and metal music, and their fourth album incorporated rap that can be referred to as gangster-style rap. I mean, even one of those combinations was considered revolutionary back then, but the group came up with new combination of genres for every single new album. Seo Taiji and Boys played a crucial role in shifting the main target of music trends from the adult demographic to the younger demographic in their teens and 20s, which satisfied the latter's desire for newer global music trends. Even singers such as So Bang-cha, Kim Wan-sun, and Park Nam-jung, who attempted to showcase a more modern sound, were still perceived as singing traditional Korean songs, just with faster beats. From the emergence of Seo Taiji and Boys onward, the demand for more youthful music from the teens and 20s exploded. Which had been previously unaddressed until that point. Again, this is referring to the Bernoulli equation that we mentioned in episode 1, mentioned by our lovely researcher.
Are you looking for me?
To explain this further, it wasn't just the trendy music the younger demographic was hungry for. Rather, they were craving trendy media in general. In the past, there were only 7 radio channels and 3 major broadcasting stations in Korea, which are the familiar trio of MBC, KBS, and SBS, and with no internet-based or cable shows. Compared to today, this is a very limited number of sources for people to go to when they are looking for media content. Imagine life with no YouTube. And no Awkward Luke channel. That's just sad. And despite government censorship beginning to die down around this time, Korean society was still very strict with adapting new styles, such as longer hair for men or dyed hair for both men and women. Imagine no dyed hair. That's a pretty difficult task. Especially when I first met Jinho.
나 불렀어?
With the media contents being pretty much monopolized by the broadcasting stations, it was very hard to break the outdated formula and internal industry rules set by them. Just to give another perspective of what the media from back then was like, the Korean movies produced during that period were typically of lower quality, and nothing produced domestically was considered to be as sensational compared to what was available from the Western world. This may depend on who you are, but for us, this is another hard thing to imagine, especially thinking about the qualities of movies like Train to Busan and Parasite. And with Netflix being a thing nowadays, I'm sure everyone can think of famous Korean contents with zero problem, aside from the two I just mentioned. Although these are not necessarily movies. Squid Game? All of Us Are Dead? Look how easily we just added another two to that list. Oh, and apparently Jinho hasn't watched either of these yet, and doesn't plan to watch them ever, because he thinks they're scary.
그만해. 나 너무 무서워.
Okay, we got a bit sidetracked there, but don't worry, we're back on track now. Continuing on, simply put, Seo Taiji and Boys created what had never existed before for the younger music consumers in South Korea. Historically, the group signals the starting point of the fast-growing K-pop industry, the starting point of various new genres emerging, and the starting point of familiar features seen in the current generation of idols. This includes group members taking on certain characters or traits, and the inclusion of lip-syncing with powerful choreographies. Maybe we can take out lip-syncing for Seo Taiji and Boys themselves and the modern idols. Debatable on that lip-syncing point, but yeah. Seo Taiji and Boys also reformulated the relationship between artists, or potentially celebrities in general, and broadcasting station producers. Back then, the CEO of the entertainment agency, the TV show producers, the broadcasting stations, and the press had absolute power and influence over the artists. The latter two, TV producers and broadcasters, would enforce massive censorship on the songs and outfits of the artists based on what they thought was appropriate, or rather, inappropriate to be more exact, to present to the public. Since Seo Taiji and Boys were able to establish their own agency after they released their first album, largely due to Seo Taiji's ability to self-produce an entire album, and the massive financial success they achieved, they were not subjected to any internal pressure from an agency. I mean, who would say no to what Seo Taiji and Boys are doing? Furthermore, the group had massive influence over the public. Seo Taiji and Boys chose to display a youthful and rebellious image to the public, and they actually used that image to challenge and rectify the broadcasting station's influences and their relationships with them. For example, Seo Taiji, who was in his 20s at the time, challenged the broadcasting stations and their producers, who are most likely older and more socially experienced than Seo Taiji himself, by declaring that his group would not appear on any of their TV shows if any sort of restrictions were imposed on their outfits. Now, you have to understand that this is an extremely bold move to be made from an artist's side. Even with the massive influence that current-day K-pop agencies have now, such as YG, SM, JYP, and Big Hit, they still do not have the power to stand up to these broadcasting stations head-to-head in the way that Seo did. Again, head-to-head. Without a proper backup protection of some sort, such actions usually result in a usual negative outcome, at the very least. Among all the achievements that many artists have achieved, this example is still one of the rarest cases in the history of K-pop. Thanks to Seo Taiji and Boys, the styling and the performance of artists has become relatively more free from censorship, as you guys can see nowadays. Or free to the extent that someone decided to do this. Some of the fashion trends the group tried and popularized include dyed hair and dreadlocks, youthful or formula-breaking outfits with their first album, hip-hop inspired fashion for their second album, skirt-based fashion for the third, and snowboarding fashion for the last album. That skirt-based fashion would have freaked out some people from back then, I assume. Seo Taiji and Boys also pioneered the concept of having a comeback. Prior to the group's debut, other artists did not dare go on a resting period due to the fear of being forgotten by the public, or more like due to the fear of what we just talked about last episode, which would be caused from disobeying the demands and intentions of broadcasting station producers. If these producers asked, or in this case forced, the artist to perform and continue their active period, they must do so, because otherwise the usual negative outcome that I mentioned before will become a reality for them. Again, the broadcasting stations had that much power over celebrities. Now, let's take a step back and think about this for a second. With how the K-pop industry is running, you can probably tell that this is a major accomplishment. We know our idols can be really busy, sometimes too busy, that they don't get the proper rest they need. If anything, we'd hear from our idols that they get an hour or two of sleep at most. And even with the concept of comeback or resting period firmly in place, we still hear about idols suffering from health issues due to an immense amount of schedules they have to carry out on a daily basis, even during what is supposedly called their resting period. Now, with that in mind, just imagine what no resting period would do to our beloved idols. Trust me, you would never want to imagine it. So let's take a moment here to say thank you to Seo Taiji and Boys. As mentioned earlier in this episode, Seo Taiji and Boys are often referred to as the president of culture in Korea. From their third album onward, the group not only attempted a revolution related to music, but also released songs that targeted societal issues. This shift in their concept caused a massive wave of influence, as actions like these were not expected from such a successful artist at all. Considering that even today, all Korean celebrities, no matter how famous they are, refrain from making any sort of political expression or comments publicly, both in their workplaces and online, Seo Taiji and Boys targeting societal issues would be quite shocking even from today's perspective. But anyway, let's take a look at what societal issues the group had targeted. First, dreaming of ballet or balle를 꿈꾸며 expressed desire for the reunification of Korea, which would be a wonderful thing. And Classroom Idea, or 교실 idea, heavily criticized the education system in Korea. And I'm sure everyone here knows what the Korean education system is like in general, so I will not comment more on that. Anyway, this shift in their image led to a decrease in their general popularity, but ultimately created a more loyal and dedicated fanbase. However, this concept change was also met with some unpleasant resistance. Due to the influence of broadcasting station producers, Seo Taiji and Boys were not able to promote their third album due to the content of the songs and the skirt-based outfits they featured. I told you earlier they would freak out. This type of fashion was supposedly proposed by their fashion coordinator, who sounds like a very open-minded and forward-thinking person to us, to support the idea behind the song Dreaming of Ballet and to symbolize history. Unfortunately, but to no one's surprise, this caused quite a controversy. Even more controversial and rather questionable, another artist had been allowed to wear such an outfit while Seo Taiji and Boys were not. This is a great example showing the stricter and older mindset of TV producers at the time, who were concerned with the social influence of the group and their destructiveness, which made us question what they were imagining. I mean, this guy debuted in the same year as Seo Taiji and Boys, and was promoting his third album as well, in a similar time period as Seo Taiji and Boys. The title song of the group's fourth album, Come Back Home, influenced people who had run away from their home in their youth to return to their families, and had such a strong impact that it was even discussed in the news. I mean, people returning back home just because of a song is no ordinary influence. Messages like these paved the way for future idols to criticize society through their music, although this is quite limited to the first generation idol groups like H.O.T. and Jack's Kiss. During this period, Seo Taiji and Boys received a lot of press coverage that commented on their musicality as destructive and dangerous. I must say that this is a very strong negativity shown by the press to any singer. The press generally were not happy with the emergence of the group and their activities, often criticizing their music, fashion, hairstyles, or lyrics. So that's everything about them. Overall, this is very, very different from the way the press views idols today. I mean, just look at how BTS is described in pretty much any press release. To say that Seo Taiji and Boys had a large fandom is an understatement. It was massive. Really, really massive. At one point, the group had an official fan club named Ivy, but it was eventually disbanded due to Seo Taiji's fear that the fan club would turn into a business driven by profiting off of fans unethically. This resulted in numerous unofficial fan clubs that had received permission to form after a simple application process, which I believe was done through the group's management. But at that point, I think a single official fan club would make things a lot easier from the management standpoint. Technically speaking, the fan club and Seo Taiji and Boys themselves had no rivals to compete with. That is, the word rival did not exist in their dictionary. In fact, the fandom was the first to add significance to the third floor center seats at the reputable Dream concert, wherever this concert is held at. But here is the thing. They were assigned this area simply because the size of the fandom could not be estimated. Carrying on with the unmeasurable legacy, this section is now the one assigned to the most popular groups. Later on, the H.O.T. fandom would eventually carry on with this legacy as well. But there is something ironic about this spot. Because if any of you guys have ever been to a concert before, before the persisting global reason, then you guys might have guessed this spot to be the worst location to watch the concert. But I guess that would have been a first world problem. In January of 1996, Seo Taiji and Boys suddenly disappeared after a live performance of Piercing, a song from their fourth album. While fans of current generation idols may not take this as a surprise, this was such a controversial incident at the time that even the news stations discussed their disappearance. And and many rumors began to circulate about it. Just as suddenly as they disappeared, the group held a sudden press conference on January 31st, 1996, none other than to officially announce their disbandment. Simply put, the group expressed their belief that they had shown everything that they could attempt. And to no one's surprise, the group's disbandment was featured as the main news story of the day. People of all ages, but especially those in their teens and 20s, were extremely shocked. The public's reaction was said to be more dramatic than when Kim Il-sung, the first North Korean leader, had passed away the previous year. For context, many people believed his death would lead to the Korean War resuming, which would have terrified every Korean citizen back then. It's not something you'd want to imagine for even a split second.
No!
No?
No!
Never?
Never, never.
For a modern-day interpretation, imagine how the public would react if a very important figure suddenly resigned from their position for no reason. That is how shocking this announcement was. To some people, the disbandment felt like the Korean music industry completely emptied itself out. Although, we now know that someone would soon be coming to fill in that void. Though subjective, the sadness felt by current-day fans experiencing a group's disbandment is said to be nowhere near what fans of Seo Taiji and Boys felt at that time, at least based on what the public has seen. Again, this is showcased well on Reply 1994 by Jo Yoon-jin when she and other fans heard that the group had disbanded. Following the press conference, there was a massive crowd of fans following the members leaving, mainly said to be female fans, along with news reporters and cameramen trying to capture the very last moments of Seo Taiji and Boys. To this day, Seo Taiji says that it is still difficult for him to recall and talk about this moment, especially after witnessing his fans crying, which he unfortunately had to ignore back then. I would assume that every celebrity would feel the same as him if they had to do that, and we always hope it won't happen. After the press conference, the members all boarded onto a helicopter, flew over to the airport, left for Guam, and said farewell to each other and went on their own way from there. That is quite the last moment for themselves. According to YG himself, Seo Taiji was suffering through the pain of creation while working on the albums. As a content creator myself, I definitely understand the pressure of continuing to create and manage every aspect of a project, even when you do have help. His pain is definitely on a more intense scale, but I can understand where he is coming from. In the end, it was Seo Taiji who had suggested the disbandment, and YG and Lee Juno could not dispute this, as they had witnessed, in first person, how much Seo Taiji was struggling as a producer. Although each member went on to pursue individual careers after their disbandment, I will not be discussing this aspect in great detail since this episode is not centered on the group's aftermath. Seo Taiji continued to release solo albums after the group's disbandment, and continued to use the numbering system from the group's last album. This meant his first solo album was counted as being 5th. You know, a famous quote says, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." And since the group split up, he has been very difficult to spot as he tends to stay out of the public eye. Now, when it comes to YG, his individual career can be explained in single terms. YG Entertainment. For Lee Juno, he began activities as a radio DJ shortly after the group's disbandment. From that point onward, he also went down the path of becoming a producer, and created a successful group named Young Turks Club. This is unlike YG, who struggled to find success initially. However, Lee Juno's ability as a producer unfortunately started to decline as the Young Turks Club released more albums. Ever since K-pop began to explode internationally, and especially after groups like BTS started gaining global popularity, much of the foreign media now view Seo Taiji and Boys as the official emergence of K-pop as we know it today. For example, in 2019, a famous American magazine, Teen Vogue, published an article titled "A Brief History of K-pop." Sounds awfully familiar. In which they named Seo Taiji and Boys as the veritable kings of K-pop. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below if you'd like to read the full article. But to paraphrase it briefly, the author explains that, and I have the quote right here, "There's no official date on record for the turning point of K-pop, but many credit its origin to Seo Taiji and Boys' tumultuous television debut and the wave of success that followed. Seo Taiji and Boys melded Western-style pop music with lyrics in Korean that went above and beyond the cultural norms acceptable in popular culture at the time. Much of South Korea's early pop music had distinct American and Japanese influences, and a glut of artists were performing trot music." The author continues here by saying, "Seo Taiji and Boys' implementation of hip-hop and New Jack Swing marked a turning point in the genre for their willingness to break tradition. Their sound had a jagged, urban edge to it. Musically, something similar to what you might hear from New Kids on the Block at the time in terms of a hip-hop swagger. And as such, their popularity in South Korea opened up several doors for them, as well as a number of groups that immediately sprang up, looking to capitalize on or replicate their success. Copycats began streaming in, all born of the entertainment industry's desire to churn out the next big thing, and what would ultimately be refined into the idol culture we know today." You know, I think that sums up really well what we discussed earlier. And that marks the end of this episode. We explored Seo Taiji and Boys' legacy as the president of culture, their fandom, their disbandment and its aftermath, and how foreign media thought of them as the starting point of the modern K-pop industry. Without pre-first generation groups like Seo Taiji and Boys, there would not be the current K-pop industry that we know in the current generation. This is why we decided to focus more on them in depth, and in fact, to start this series, so we can truly understand where the root of K-pop comes from. In the next episode, we'll begin to explore the exciting beginning of first-generation idols, the actual first generation. Starting with the history of the hugely popular HOT from a very famous and familiar agency, SM Entertainment. Before we close off, we'd like to ask you these questions. Do you know any other information about Seo Taiji and Boys that we haven't already mentioned in this video? And which achievement of the group impressed you the most? Please let us know in the comments down below, and feel free to share something that you learned from today's episode. Let us know if we missed anything in today's video or if anything needs to be corrected. And please leave any questions you have throughout the season on any particular video in this series, as we're already planning to have a special review or Q&A episode at the end of this season. As always, thank you so much for watching and for supporting the History of K-pop series. Stay awkward, and I hope you'll tune in for next time. Bye!